Hello and welcome back to One Last Night. We'll be continuing where we left off, which, if you recall, is after Dorian met Xavier, and after Dorian was basically attacked by a Faded, which is, from what he could tell us, people that I guess lose hope. Um, I guess they lose the will to live, so they become this sort of empty husk of a person, and they mutate into some monster. So yeah, it sounds very familiar from other stories that I've read or movies where when a person loses the will to live, they become a monster. I'm trying to think of which story I have in mind that reminds me of, but it hasn't entered my head. Maybe by the end of the episode I'll remember. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, Dorian did say that he and Xavier are gonna go to this place called Haven, which I guess is a safe place for people that have survived this apocalypse, and they all, basically pull together their resources, and they help each other. I'm assuming, but yeah, we'll have to see what happens if and when they get there. So, well, let's continue the story and see what happens. I wake up to the sound of someone shifting next to me. Instinctively, I reach out to grab my phone, planning to turn off my upcoming alarms that will get me started for the day. Instead, my fingers brush against the nylon fabric lining the ground, causing me to open my eyes. Oh, I no longer have that comfortable life I took for granted, but one of someone trying to survive. Pushing the sleeping bag off of my torso, I sit up and take a second to stretch. I hear the rustling once more and glance over to see my newfound companion, still trying to get comfortable in the space next to me while he sleeps. Last night, I had gone to sleep before him, inviting him to rest in my tent to help fight off the cold nights. He said he'd think about it, but was going to do a watch first just to be safe, making sure no enemies were nearby. Clearly, he took me up on my offer and was enjoying it by how soundly he slept. As I watched him, I thought about the journey to come. We'll need to get on the road soon if we're to stick to the schedule I've planned out. At the same time, though, Xavier saved my life yesterday and learned about the new world. Kid deserves some extra few minutes rest, I'd say. Quietly, I get up from our shared bed, grabbing my bag and spear as I head for the flaps. I carefully step around the unconscious bat and give my best effort not to make too much noise as I do. Once outside, I took a look at the familiar area briefly. This place had served me well the past couple of weeks, a good spot that was close enough to the city but enough of a distance away that enemies wouldn't wander near. At least, that's what I thought up until yesterday. I set my bag down next to one of the logs on the campfire, keeping my spear in hand to check the perimeter. I walk along its edges, scanning the brush for anything that would have been out of place. There's a path with some snapped branches where someone had clearly run through it, but a pink string hanging from a branch tells me who made it. This was clearly the direction Xavier had come from, the opposite of town. I couldn't help but wonder about his story again, questioning its truth. There was that unmistakable look of pain and trauma in his eyes when he first told me, so there was certainly some honesty to it. Yet it was awfully convenient he happened to be there at the exact right moment. I felt that I could trust Xavier, and I wanted to, but the logistical part of my brain needed to know more. I continued this train of thought as I scouted the rest of the area, stopping for a moment to go pay my respects at the makeshift grave. When I arrived, I found a secondary headstone next to the body. Very roughly carved into a slab of wood were some words. To whoever you were before. Ah, after I'd gone to bed, Xavier must have made this knowing the fated were once like us. They may not have been a person when they died, but they were once. He no doubt was carrying some guilt with that thought, and this must have been to ease it. Truthfully, I'd planned to make one this morning, but it seems I've been spared the trouble. I knelt down before the gravestone, apologizing that the world had taken them in this way, and wishing them to be at peace now. Just another tragedy amongst the many already, and the more they were to come. I returned to my bag in the clearing, satisfied that we were in the clear. The faint rot of the faded had begun to permeate the air, the stench unwelcome in the morning light. Since we wouldn't be in this area for much longer, it should be okay to start a fire for now. The smoke would give away that someone was here, but not before we had left. Besides, I'm not sure I can handle that smell much longer. With the now pleasant scent of wood smoke drowning out the rot, I set to work on my routine. Reaching into my pack, I take out a plastic bag and untie it, removing the journals within. I'd learned my lesson in letting everything sit in my bag when I'd slipped and fallen into a river early on. It waterlogged one of the books and ruined many of the entries within. After that, I made sure to take extra good care of them. I find the three that I need and set them out in front of me, putting the rest back in. First, I grab the journal to write today's entry. I describe the events of the previous day in detail, making notes of my questions and my plans for what to do next. This had become a ritual for me even before the apocalypse. It was an easy way to organize my thoughts. It was a bonus, it helped me to keep track of the days, giving me that sense of calm that there was at least something still consistent. It was hard at first to do so, the new daylight cycle confusing me for a while before I got used to it. In the end, it was all something that you had to get used to eventually. Signing off on the entry, I close the journal and place it to the side to pick up the next one. I flip through the logs in here, giving each a brief glance and mumbling some of the names to myself. The Butcher. The Silence. The Blob. Finding a blank page, I begin the new entry. The Vampire, rank B, status deceased, height approximately 13 feet. Features elongated limbs, claws, fangs, scarlet eyes. Ability drains all moisture from one's body using two sharp fangs at the front of its mouth. Weakness, arrows. I start to sketch it on the opposite page, making notes on its significant traits. Whenever I encounter a new faded, I keep a record of them for the future. We've managed to kill the vampire yesterday, but most of the time the better solution is to flee. A number of the faded in this journal are sure to still be alive and wandering. Some might have been killed by others like Haven, since I'd seen them last. It'd be something I'd have to ask about when I got there. I hear the rustling of the tent opening, accompanied by a yawn. I turn my head to look and watch as Xavier steps towards me, arms reaching towards the sky as he stretches. Morning, kid. Morning, Dorian. Get a good sleep? Better than I have the past few nights, that's for sure. I look back down at the sketch, adding the last few touches as Xavier approached. What are you writing? An entry for the faded we fought yesterday. I accentuate my point by hooking a thumb over my shoulder in its direction. I keep a log of all the ones that I've encountered so far. Wow! I didn't know you could sketch like that. It's impressive. A soft smile creeps onto my face at the remark. Thanks, it's one of the hobbies that's persisted through everything. He takes a seat next to me and watches as I finish up. From how far you are into that thing, you must have encountered quite a few. I've seen my fair share over the months. Some I managed to defeat, others I just ran from. If you can avoid a fight with those monsters, that's the route you want to take. No point in risking your life for the sake of glory. Think I could get a look at it? I close the book with the entry now finished, looking towards my companion. At a later point, sure. For now, though, we've got some other business to attend to. I pick up the last of the three journals and give it a tap on the cover. An inventory check. I'll go over my supplies first while you prepare us some breakfast. Then we'll take a look at what you have on you on a separate page. It's easier to plan for the future when you know what you're working with and when you'll need to restock. The bat gives me a nod of approval, smiling. You really do know what you're doing, don't you, old man? I look at him, blinking in surprise. What? You call me kid. It's only fitting I address my elder as what they are. An elder? He begins laughing at my shock as I stare at him incredulously. Did he really just call me old? The more I listen to him laughing, I can't help but find myself joining in as well. It's infectious. He got me good with that one, I'll admit. Just means I need to step up my game for the next time. Phew. Okay. I'll get started on a meal for us. Before he can get up to grab his stuff, I hand him 2 cans of stew. He opens his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. You did our meal last night. I get to do ours this morning. Don't argue because I won't hear it. Xavier looks at me with a smile and blushes slightly, seeming a bit embarrassed. Thanks, Dorian. He turns away to figure out how best to heat our food as I begin my inventory check. The only changes from yesterday are the number of rations and a slight dip in the bandage department. After we've unwrapped me yesterday, I'd given all the excess material to Xavier for his supplies. I also made a mental note that, although we are going to Haven, it'd be better to stock up on rations before we entered their camp. It'd be a good teaching moment for Xavier on how to scavenge as well. I finish up the checklist just in time to see the bat approaching me with the cans now wrapped up in a cloth. Careful, they're hot. I give him a smile as I took the can from his hands, blowing at the steam rising from the open lid. Reaching into one of the bag pockets, I took out 2 spoons and passed one over for him to use. The two of us dug into our respective meals, enjoying the taste of the hearty chicken stew. We ate in silence for a while, enjoying the presence of each other while listening to the crackling of the fire before us. You beat me to it. Xavier gave me a confused look. To what? The gravestone. Ah. That. Well, after what you told me last night, it didn't feel right to leave nothing there in their memory. Whoever they were before, they surely had a life. People who cared for them and people they cared for. Plus, since I had a crucial role in their death, I felt a sense of responsibility that I should be the one to lay them to rest. Xavier, I know. They weren't who they were once, and are probably grateful to be free of that horrible state. Still, I couldn't just do nothing. I waited in silence for a few moments after that before speaking up once more. Can I finish what I was saying now? Go ahead. I was going to say I'm proud of you, kid. Xavier gave a surprised look at that. Oh, why's that? Well, you've got a good head on your shoulders. You have a moral compass to be admired, and it's something I'm happy to see in someone your age. He shot me a glare at that last part. Again, you're only 3 years older. I intertwined my hands and closed my eyes, attempting my best impression of how I imagined someone would look if they were enlightened. And yet, I am wise beyond them. I was met with a laugh from my companion, and I joined in one. Keep telling yourself that, old man. The laughter continued as we finished up the remainder of our soup, and I beckoned Xavier over. Alright, let's go over your inventory and see what you have. It occurred to me that I didn't even know how he'd been keeping his supplies like the food from last night. Say, where are you keeping your stuff? You don't have a backpack. Xavier gave me a smile as he slid off his quiver. That's because I've been using this. Passing it over to me, the thing was a lot bulkier than I realized. Well, it was skinny at the top and the bottom for arrows. The thing was covered in pouches and pockets used to store various things. Where did you even get something like this? My parents invested in some self-defense survival company, and this was one of the rewards for their tier they pledged. Fascinating. It was unlike anything I had seen before, and yet, there was a vague sense of familiarity about the design I couldn't quite place. I hand the quiver back over to Xavier before opening my bag once more to replace the books into their respective plastic bag. Then I slide a new, smaller notebook with a pen out of one of the front pockets I'd placed there as a spare for a spare. I open it up to the first page, writing Xavier's supplies across the header. So kid, let's start with the easiest thing and probably the most important for you to track, the arrows. As I counted them out, Xavier began speaking to fill the silence. Sorry if everything is a bit disorganized. I just grabbed whatever was near and shoved it into the pockets, anywhere they'd fit. Well, aside from the few things that I already had in there. Not glancing up, I continued the conversation as I inspected the arrows for wear and tear in order to separate them into 2 groups. What do you already have? The arrows, most obviously. Other than that, it was a few basic supplies like rations, a water bottle, a book on Morse code, a multi-tool, etc. I paused and glanced up at him. Wait, what was that last thing? Xavier gave me a confused look. Etc.? Well, it's an adverb that's used to indicate that there are more similar things followed. He cut himself off, seeing the deadpan look I gave him. Surely you know what a multi-tool is, Dorian? I shook my head and drew out a long sigh. The book, Xavier. How was that a basic supply? Why wouldn't it be? You'll never know when Morse code might come in handy. But once you learn it, do you really still need the book around? I guess not. There were a few moments of silence that followed before he spoke up again. Do you know Morse code? Nope. Aha! The book has a use once more. Point Xavier. Since when is there a score over our conversations? Since I started winning. This elicited a laugh from the both of us as we began to focus more on taking stock of his supplies. Sure enough, it was a bit of a messy ordeal. While the aforementioned items were there, including the book, everything was strewn about. I was glad I had taken the time to do this beforehand. This would make things easier down the line if we ever needed to search for something. I draw a small sketch of the backpack quiver in my book and annotate the pockets with numbers. From there, I write the numbers on the opposite page and list each object stored there with their quantity. Despite Xavier having to grab whatever he could, he had a fair amount of items that could be useful later for basic survival. Some rope, a small mirror, a miniature first aid kit that was nearly all bandages, water purification tablets, a deck of cards, and more. Not a bad haul, kid. We'll make a survivor out of you yet. Thanks. Xavier shot me a beaming smile, and I felt my heart skip a beat at seeing the joy in his features. I really was growing attached to him, and fast. I'd never been the type to make quick friends, but he and I just seemed to click naturally. It was a nice contrast. I closed the notebook and slid the pen down its spine, holding it out to Xavier. Well then, here you go, kid. Xavier was surprised at the gesture. Wait, what? You're just giving it to me? Of course I am. After what you told me yesterday, I figured you could use one for yourself. It's a good way to keep track of and organize everything you need to, even if it's just your own thoughts. The bat smiles and opens the notebook, making a notation in his inventory page and placing it into his quiver. With the bags now organized, I stood up from the log and brushed off my pants. What's next on the to-do list then? Anything else we need? I stretched my back as I answered, eyes closed, as I felt a bit of a midriff exposure from my shirt. Nothing we can't do on the road. I'll pack up our tent while you put out the campfire. I waited for his response, but was met with silence. Opening my eyes again, I saw he was staring up at me as I stretched, seemingly in a daze. Hello? Earth to Xavier? I waved my hand in front of his face, which seemed to snap him out of it. What? Oh, right. Sure thing, Dorian. He quickly moved himself to the other side of the campfire and crouched down in an attempt to hide himself behind the flames. Strange kid. I turned back and walked over to the tent, rolling up my sleeping bag and tying it to the bottom of the pack. We'd have to find one for Xavier later, but for now the nighttime warmth of another person was a welcome sensation. Considering how well he was sleeping when I woke up, I could tell he enjoyed it as well. Especially if he had no blankets the past few nights while wearing that outfit. Naturally, Xavier had finished first and walked over to help me dismantle the tent. It didn't take too long between the two of us, and next thing I knew we were ready to go. That should be everything, kid. Let's get a move on. The two of us walked over to the path leading out the clearing, and I stopped at the edge, tossing a look back at the area. Please don't. I glanced over at him, a very judgy look on his face. Don't what? You look like you were about to speak at the campsite and say goodbye, as if it were a sentient. I blinked at the sudden personal read. Well, it served me well and it deserves a thanks. Xavier shook his head and gave me a smile. Whatever helps you sleep at night, old man. He turned around and continued to walk down the path, giving me some time alone with the place. Looking back behind me now, the moment had passed and I let out a sigh as I followed after him, muttering under my breath. Point Xavier. The canopy above allowed glimpses of sunlight through as we trekked towards the city, me taking the lead as I'm more familiar with the terrain and know where we're going. No matter how much time I'd spent out here, I don't think I'd ever gotten enough of walking with these trails. There was something I found comforting about these woods, like it was a home away from home with the fresh scent of nature in the air. I suppose that was one benefit of the end. The air pollution had reduced significantly. There was no longer that heavy stench of motor oil and rotten garbage that often came with it. There was a nice change of pace to be able to breathe fully and not have to worry about inhaling the smell of someone's leftovers. That had been in the refrigerator a bit too long and sat baking in the black bag under the unforgiving sun. I turned my attention back to our walk, not letting myself get lost in the unnecessary thoughts. I don't need to get caught off guard while having some kind of shit attempt at a poetic monologue, and that'd be a heavy, embarrassing way to die. Well, for me at least. We continue to walk in silence for a good half hour or so, and before my brain can make another attempt at ranting to myself, Xavier speaks up. So, nice weather we're having? I blink at the bat and shoot him a look of amused disappointment. Yes, it is quite lovely. Not an aircraft in sight. Now, what is it that you really want to ask? Xavier begins to redden in embarrassment as I call him out. I didn't really have any specific in mind to talk about. I just, wanted to talk more with you. And you thought the weather was a good place to start? He threw his arms up in defeat. I don't know, man. I'm a year out of practice with this stuff, and I didn't exactly speak to many people before then either. I'm not really sure how conversations are supposed to go. Ah, another socially awkward butterfly like I used to be. Well, kid, here's some advice. If you want to talk to someone you're not familiar with, try broaching them with a topic to get to know them better. From there, you're sure to find something in common, and if not, you can always learn something new. Xavier took a moment to consider that before responding. Well then, how did you end up getting so confident? If you're able to talk with people now, what gave you that push forward? Before I could stop myself, I barked out a laugh. Oh kid, I'm not confident in the slightest. Really? Yeah, really. I come off as confident because that's how I chose to act. Fake it till you make it, as they say. Inside, I'm actually a bundle of worries, but the more time you spend putting on a show, the easier it gets each time. I could see in my companion's eyes as he filled the mental note away to use later. You really suit this mentor role well. Must be all those years of experience. Am I the first person you've taken under your wing? I cover my laugh with a cough at hearing him use that turn of phrase. I suppose you are. I've never really had anyone to train or teach things. I'm usually the student in those situations. Then for my sake, I hope you took a few notes to prepare yourself for this then. Ah, yes. I'm sure this will be my greatest challenge yet, teaching a young brat the true ways of the world. Xavier looked shocked at my word choice. Who are you calling a brat? Did I say that? I'm pretty sure I meant bat. I may be the older one here, but it seems like you're the one in need of hearing test. We both began laughing at my retort, continuing to walk forward. Alright, point Dorian on that one. Aw, thanks, Xavier. I rustle my fingers through his head fur in an appreciative gesture. Though, if I'm going to be your mentor, I'm not sure how well that fares for me. What do you mean? Well, often in the media, whenever the mentor figure is introduced to a character and trains them, said mentor later ends up dying. It's a classic trope used across all kinds of narratives. The bat gives me a glare at that. Not everything is a movie or whatever though, is it? You're right, sometimes though, life is a bit more enjoyable, if you see it through that lens, especially when you find yourself in a reality such as this one. Xavier nodded in agreement before thinking something over once more. How about this? In order to break that sort of narrative, I'll teach you a few things in return. A transaction of skills so the whole thing is less one-sided. Would that break the trope? Wouldn't hurt to try. I've always wanted to get better at archery. Can't say whether I'll be a good teacher or not, but I've been practicing since I was a kid. It's always been one of my hobbies and I grew quite good at it. I mean, you saw me help you take down that faded. I think I'm a pretty good shot. That you are. You really saved my ass back there. I wasn't exactly gonna let you die now, was I? I've been taught to look out for myself first, but knowing that I could help you then, that I could do something, that feeling was liberating. What's next? Are you going to thank me for being in danger? In your dreams, old man. The two of us shared another laugh at that. On the topic though, how'd you get so good at using the spear? You might not believe me, but honestly, fencing. I was on the school team for all of middle and high school. Granted, I was rusty when things started to go wrong a year ago, but training with the folks at Haven helped me get back to a point where I could defend myself properly. Hell, they even made my spear. I give my weapon a little whirl to accentuate my point. Better than wielding a regular kitchen knife like I was using at the time. Instead, it became the tip for my new weapon. Wow, I know you told me a bit about them before, but what else can you say about Haven? I thought for a moment about my time with them. As I said, they're a safe community. It first started as a place to gather supplies in order to create a sense of unity amongst the unknown. Then, when the Fated started appearing, they began establishing themselves as a hub of safety for those that needed it. They built up the walls to keep the Fated and other enemies out. They set up a system of scouts to search for supplies, monitor the area, track Fated, rescue survivors, and more. Granted, its formation was completely by accident, just a bunch of people trying to help, turning into a sanctuary for those in need of help. There were other groups amongst the city, some like Haven and others going towards a darker path. Overall, however, Haven stands amongst the best of the options in my opinion. Xavier smiled at this. No matter what world we live in, people still find a way to come together. Based on how you talk about them, you really admire them, don't you? I gave him a smile back. Of course I do. They're some of the best people that I know. I doubt I'd be here without them. Then, if you trust them so much, so do I. He gave me a nod as we walked the path forward in silence for a few moments, the conversation reaching its natural end. It was quiet for a while again, the two of us enjoying the company of the other, until there was a familiar noise off just to the left of the path. I'd been to it a lot over the past few months, and since it was on the way, I thought it would be a perfect pit stop. I began to veer towards the brush as Xavier walked up next to me. Where are we going this way? Won't the path lead us to the city? It will, and we'll get there in due time. However, we've got a few things to do before reaching Haven. Like what? You'll see. What happened to this whole telling me everything part? If it'll be something important that you'll need to know to help with survival, absolutely. Menial tasks like these, though, can be left as sweet little surprises. So, this is one of our pit stops? Correct. I walked a bit faster to get ahead of the bat as we began traipsing through the underbrush, the sound slowly growing louder as we approached. Xavier seemed to notice now too, his ears giving a brief twitch as he analyzed what he was hearing. Is that? His answer was cut off short as our destination came into view before us, the soft sound of rushing water now clear. Before us now was a river, the water flowing at a brisk pace as it collided with the rocks beneath the surface. It wasn't too deep, the bottom still visible as we approached the riverbank, and I slid my pack off to set to the side. The sun shone down on the brook, hopefully providing some warmth to the stream as the greenery surrounding the area blew ever so slightly on the breeze. Overall, it was a beautiful spot that had remained relatively undisturbed over the years, even less so now. My companion seemed to notice this as well as he took in the sight in awe. Wow, this place is gorgeous! How'd you manage to find this? Xavier stepped further ahead of me into the clearing. I've hiked these trails many times over the years, not just after the apocalypse either. There's only so much that you can explore before you decide to blaze new trails. However, this was one of my discoveries. Xavier followed my lead now, placing his quiver pack down. I intended to waste no time here, sliding my shirt off as he examined the watery clearing. Most importantly, the sound coming from the stream is a good noise reduction for what we'll be doing here. My pants were at my ankles as the bat turned to look at me. Are you finally going to tell me the... Xavier glanced at my mostly nude form, a heat beginning to rise in his cheeks as he tried to speak. What? But... I stepped out of my pants and hooked my thumbs into my underwear, about to slide them down as my companion is able to finally string words together in an almost squeal. Stop! What do you think you're doing? I blink at him in confusion, moving my hands back to my sides. Getting undressed? Why? I gesture to the river, expecting him to connect the dots on his own. He takes a few moments as his face begins to redden further beneath his fur at realizing what I'm talking about. We're going to bathe? Like, together? Well, not together per se, but in close proximity of each other, yes. I'd rather we stick close by, just in case, and there's plenty of room in the river for the both of us. His blush seems to ease a bit at that answer, and I smirk, taking into consideration how flustered I just made him. What's the matter, kid? You aren't afraid of a little male contact, are you? The bat immediately flusters again, at a loss for words. Oh, come on. That wasn't even my best work. You act like you've never seen another nude male before. That's because I haven't. Now that surprises me. Wait, really? Of course not. What do you mean? I thought you were gay. His flustered state turns into shock at that. What? How did you know? I gave him my most disappointed look yet, and used a hand to gesture to the outfit he's currently wearing. If he thought that he looked straight in those clothes, the kid might have been more clueless than I thought. Xavier glances down at himself and rubs at his arms, embarrassed. Point taken. I give him a soft smile. I'm still surprised, though. You're a conventionally attractive dude. I thought surely you would have had a guy hanging off your arm at some point. Xavier seems to get a bit uncomfortable at that insinuation, not meeting my eyes as he responds. I had a rather sheltered upbringing. Never got the chance to try a relationship or anything like it. Oh. An awkward silence begins to descend on the two of us. I speak up first, trying to break the tension before it gets too thick. Well, hey. Think of it this way. You've already seen my body before when you first bandaged me, so there should be nothing new. Xavier meets my eyes again before they start to wander downward a bit as he considers my point, shooting back upwards suddenly. I guess that's true enough. I saw all of you except for, well, you know. He gives a vague gesture to my crotch, trying not to look down in that direction. I think over the current predicament and how I'd rather not waste too much time here, coming to the direct conclusion. It'll make things less awkward if you were nude too. What? The bat immediately flusters up again at my statement. There goes all my work taking him down. Kid, I know you're nervous, but we don't have much time to waste here. Plus, you're going to need to bathe eventually, and what better place to do it than at a natural river? It's a refreshing experience once you get used to the cold. Xavier looks down to the water and back at me, taking a few deep breaths to calm himself down. All right. You can do this, Xavier. Nothing to be worried over. Piece of cake. No big deal. He repeats a few similar statements to himself as he begins to undress, eyes closed, as to help with the anxiety he's surely feeling and to tune out the world. Seeing my companion undress, I'm able to get a proper look at his body with the sunlight shining over the riverbank. While he doesn't have abs, his body is sleek and defined, like that of an athlete. He has more musculature in his chest and arms, likely due to his skills with the bow. My assessment was right earlier. Xavier really is attractive. I'm sure that he'd had many dudes chasing after him if he got out into the world more. Maybe he'll even still find his chance now. If there's one thing this apocalypse taught me, it's that even the most unexpected things can happen. That could include a random twink finding love. I cover my mouth to hide my laugh at my thoughts as I remove his pants, not wanting him to think I'm laughing at him. As he does so, I take a moment to really pay attention to Xavier's arms, as I realize something's off between them. It takes me a few glances back and forth before my brain finally makes the connection. He only has one wing. I'm surprised it took me this long to notice. I'd always considered myself observant, but this realization puts that to shame. Then again, I didn't really check him out over our day and a quarter together. I make a mental note of it to ask about it later, not wanting him to feel judged after he'd gotten the courage to take his clothes off in the first place. He finishes folding his jeans before placing them in a pile to the side and moving to remove his underwear, causing me to follow suit. I catch a glimpse of Xavier's cock as I do so. It's average size with a decent girth to it, uncut too. Quickly though, I avert my eyes. Last thing that I need is for him to start calling me a pervert. It's not like I can help the urge to look at another man's crotch. It's only natural to want to know what they're packing downstairs. I cringe at my own internal monologue. I need to stop trying to justify myself to, well, myself in the stupidest of ways. He opens his eyes again to look at me, our gaze meeting now for the first time in the nude. Not so hard now, was it? Xavier startles at that. It wasn't this whole time, I swear. I blink at that response. What? Didn't you mean... Oh. Oh. Nothing, never mind, don't worry about it. Wasn't hard to do, nope. I understood what you said the first time. It takes a few moments as the dots begin to connect in my head. Here I thought I had the dirty mind. Instead of pressing him on the matter, I decide to drop it to give the bat some form of relief. I crouch down next to my bag, reaching into the pockets to take out some soap and spare washcloths. Thanks to my organization methods, I find the supplies easily and hand Xavier his share. I can already guess that you'll want to bathe separately rather than together. If you don't mind. No problem, just stay close by in case any danger should arise. We've got a schedule to stick to, but we're free to take a little time to enjoy ourselves here too. Aye aye, Captain. We both begin to head in opposite directions from each other. I keep my eye on him to make sure that he doesn't wander too far, however. Satisfied with the distance, I turn my attention upstream and begin to wash myself. Xavier had done a decent job the previous day in cleaning me up, but it wasn't the same as having a proper chance to wash yourself. There was something rejuvenating about letting fresh water run over your body, cleansing you literally but in a way mentally as well. I'd learned to appreciate spending time bathing from Marshall, who loves to do it. He'd take a while, sometimes too long, in the shower, making sure that his fur was absolutely pristine. I tease him about it from time to time, which usually got me wrapped in a big hug and smelling like wet dog with hints of citrus body wash. When we would have our baths together, he taught me that bathing could be more than just a necessity but a time of leisure as well. A way to let your stress flow off of you and give you the chance to just breathe. I listened to him and slowly but surely I felt the urge to let the hot water flow over my skin, grow stronger and stronger each time. Granted, I never spent as long in there as Marshall did due to the fact that he has fur and I don't. I splashed my face with the cold stream water, bringing myself back to the present and ending my reminiscing. The stream, unfortunately, isn't terribly warm due to the minimal sunshine it gets, but it's enough so that I'm not horribly freezing just by touching it. Doesn't really compare to the hot shower though. I spent a good while and cleaned my body thinking more about Marshall all the while. It's rare you're able to connect with someone on such a visceral level, to be able to reach the point where you feel like you were truly understanding each other. I was drawn to him the moment we met, feeling some kind of connection instantly. Then over time, he won me over with his compassion, his kindness, his humor. He was there for me whenever I needed him, wherever I needed him. That's the kind of man he is. He was such a beautiful soul, and I smile whenever I think of that handsome, dopey face. I'm confident in my words when I say Marshall is my true love, the one I'm destined to be with. As I told Xavier last night, if something had happened to him, deep in my chest, I'd know it. He has to be out there somewhere, and I'm sure he's looking for me too. I stare up into the sky hoping somewhere out there he's looking up at it too, the little remaining daylight already beginning to fade away. I will find you, my love. Your deputy is coming. I did up the last button on my shirt as I finished getting dressed, shaking my hair out a bit to help it dry easier. Glancing over, I saw Xavier's pile of clothes was still sitting next to his quiver, untouched since earlier. A quick look back revealed that the bat was still splashing himself with the water. Looks like I'm not the only one who appreciates a good cleaning. I'd have let him go a little while longer normally, but we are already into twilight again, and we have one more stop to make before the day was over. Hey kid! Wrap it up, we've got places to be. Coming! I see him splash himself one last time and shiver before he continues to shore and shakes it off a bit, almost like a wet dog. I toss him a towel to dry himself before he looks up, barely catching it in time. Thanks! I turn my attention back towards my bag, putting the supplies from our bath time away. It feels great to be clean after the fight the day before. I noticed as well that the bruising had already begun to fade away for the most part. It was a miracle I'd managed to get away from the fight relatively unscathed, something I owed entirely to Xavier's presence and timing. Suspicious as the timing was, I still owed him my life for that coincidence. He was more likely a friend than foe. I was still determined to keep him by my side for the next while. A good few minutes later, my companion had toweled off and clothed himself. His fur remained a bit wet, particularly the fluff around his head. I'm ready to go, old man. We can still make progress before your 7 o'clock bedtime. I rolled my eyes at that while he adjusted his quiver, turning to take the lead. You whippersnappers these days. We both let out a chuckle as we started off onto the main path, pushing the brush aside on the makeshift trail. The sounds of the creek began to slowly fade behind us, a comforting contrast to the typical woodland atmosphere. I savored moments like these. After all, it was hard to tell when or if you'd be able to experience them again, so you needed to make them count. It wasn't a long trek before we were back and moving forward on the path. The light had dimmed, the trees blocking out a good portion of the twilight sky, but providing enough to let us see where we were going fairly easily. Everything was once again painted with the warmer colors that accompanied the setting sun, a fact I'd never quite grown used to. As if naturally following the unnatural cycle, the forest had quieted somewhat, as the wild animals settled down for the extended evening. A pleasant silence passed between the two of us as Xavier sidled up next to me. I took comfort in the fact that for the first time in a while I wasn't alone. Well, wasn't alone with someone I felt I could trust at least. I'd run into some bandits here and there, as well as a few survivors during my time out by myself, but I never managed to feel truly safe around any of them. Yet with Xavier, that changed almost instantly. To be honest, the sensation kind of scared me, which is why I kept at least a few degrees of separation from fully trusting him. The last thing that I needed right now was to grow attached only to end up betrayed. Still, I couldn't help but think back and compare the past year with all that I'd accomplished. As I was contemplating that is when Xavier decided to break the silence. So, I want to talk more about Haven. Be my guest. I know you have all this faith and trust in them, and I'm sure they've earned it, but how long exactly have you known them? Is it really long enough to be able to put your full loyalty towards them? Of course. I've been there since the start after all. Wait, really? Yep. You're talking to one of the founding members of Haven. How do you manage that? Right place, right time, I guess. I'd made connections with some of the survivors early on, helping the injured and scavenging for resources. Then when the Fated appeared, it kind of forced us into our own group for protection. I wound up joining forces with those survivors and making a base camp in the suburbs closer to the outskirts than the urban areas. Slowly the community grew in both members and resources. I remember the day when they found a bunch of seed packets for different fruits and vegetables. People were ecstatic, but we didn't know whether they'd grow properly or not due to the lack of sunlight. For whatever reason, the plants seemed to be thriving in this environment, so that was a massive stroke of luck. That's great and all, but did you say other groups? Did you really think in a city that big that there'd only be one concentration of survivors? Xavier reddened at that question. Fair point. Some are allies to Haven, but others hold a more hostile attitude. None more so than the bandits. Bandits? Shit, this really does seem like an apocalypse. I gave a laugh at his remark. You're telling me. Why did you leave it behind then, to move out here? Oh, it wasn't to move here per se. This is just one of the locations that I'd been at. I left because although it felt good to help people and be surrounded by others, part of me was overwhelmed at times and needed a break. Mostly, though, as selfish as it is, was because of Marshall. Xavier cocked his head, confused at that. I thought you didn't know what happened to him. I don't. And that was a problem. Months of no word about him, of investigating dead ends, of sitting here and hoping he'd show up. I couldn't take it anymore, not being able to roam and try to find him, so I left. There's some silence between us, then as Xavier thinks it over. I'm sure he's criticizing me for putting my personal life in front of the needs of others. I know I have. I'm surprised then to look at him and find an appreciative look sprawled across his face. It couldn't have been an easy decision to make. You gave a lot of yourself to Haven, and I'm sure they're grateful for it. It's okay to be selfish sometimes. I don't think any less of you for it. If anything, after hearing all of that, I only think more highly. What you did with Haven is an impressive feat that not many could manage. Cut yourself some slack. It was almost like he was a mind reader the way he knew exactly what I was thinking. I felt myself begin to blush a bit at the kind words, my heart only warming further towards trusting the bat. Thanks, kid. That means a lot. I felt my smile grow a bit mischievous as I look at him. Now that you know that I'm a bit of a celebrity, however, I have to ask. You want an autograph? I accentuate my statement with a wink, to which he rolls his eyes. As if your scribble on a piece of paper would be worth anything. It could be. Never underestimate the value of a signature. Yeah, I'll make sure to learn it so that I can forge it onto all my future doctor's notes to get out of gym class. Do those actually work? Based off my past experiences, yes, they do. My gym teacher either caught on or thought I was horribly ill, but I'm also not a doctor, so my signature could be worthless in that regard. Thank God you aren't. I wasn't ready to give up apples. I thought back on his statement for a moment. Did you really never try it growing up, though? Apples? Of course I did. They're my favorite fruit. Must. Resist. Urge. I thought I was your favorite fruit. Resistance failed. Xavier shoots me the same judging look from when we left the campsite, and I put my hands up in defense. It's not my fault you set yourself up for that one. I wasn't referring to apples with my question. He rolls his eyes before continuing the conversation. Then what were you talking about? The doctor's note part. Oh, yeah, I never really gave it a shot. I doubt it would have even worked. How come? Are you a bad liar? I told you that shirt looked nice, didn't I? No. Oh. Well, the shirt looks really nice on you. I glare at him. What's wrong with my shirt? The bat continues talking as if I hadn't said anything. My lying skills aside, though, I never tried it because I was homeschooled. My parents took me out when I was young and taught me all the way to college level. So that's what you meant when you said you were sheltered. Yep, never had a chance to go to public school to make friends. Just me and my parents and textbooks and the internet. If you had the internet, why didn't you try to make friends that way? I made a few from around the world and even some from around here. Hope they're all okay. Xavier looks suddenly uncomfortable at my remarks, fiddling with his hands awkwardly. I'd rather avoid that topic for now, please. It's a rather touchy subject for me. Right, sorry. You got it. An awkwardness that usually follows this kind of situation began to rise between us, the tension slowly thickening the atmosphere as we walked. I had to think. From what I knew about Xavier, what were topics he enjoyed? There had to be something to cheer him up. It clicked to me suddenly as I remembered a point of interest from our conversation this morning. Say, we have some time to kill as we walk. How about you take out that book of yours and you can start teaching me Morse code? In an instant, Xavier seemed to perk up at that suggestion. Really? You want to learn? Of course I do, Xavier. It never hurts to pick up a new skill. You'll never know when it may come in handy. He excitedly pulled a book from a bigger pocket on his quiver, flipping a few pages in before looking up at me. Alright, I don't know how much exactly you know about Morse code, so I'll start from the very basics. Essentially, it's a system of dashes and dots that are used to make up the whole alphabet, numbers, and some symbols. It can be used for a variety of different signals, which we'll get to eventually. It can be used both in writing and in sound, though the latter is more common as it helps send messages via the radio in disguise. I thought about the last part for a moment. Newsflash, kid, we don't exactly have much technology anymore. Nobody's been able to use any sort of electronics since that day, not even good old-fashioned AA batteries. Does it matter anyhow? There are other ways that we can use it with sound. I'll teach you an easy and important phrase to start off with. Xavier slings the quiver off his shoulder and removes the small notebook and pen I gave him earlier, flipping to a blank page near the back. The most known and one of the easiest to transmit is SOS. I'm assuming you know it, but it's a commonly known distress signal. Fun fact, it was developed for a maritime use and doesn't actually stand for anything despite what some people might say. You'll hear people claim that it stands for stuff like save our souls, but that's all complete bullshit. Moving back to my point, however, the translation for this would be 3 dots, 3 dashes, and 3 dots. These make up the corresponding letters to the signal. He holds a notebook in front of me to show me what he's written, the notebook corresponding with what he just said. Something wasn't clicking for me, though. That's great and all, but how do we do the dashes if there isn't anything to make the prolonged sound? Simple. We use 3 quick taps instead. Hold on, let me just... Xavier takes a look around the trail, moving ahead to pick up 2 sticks and turning to face me. He then taps the sticks together in order of SOS. 3 hits, 3 sets of quick taps, and 3 more hits. That's how you would signal SOS. It's always good to know just in case something happens and you end up in danger. Here, give it a try. He hands me the sticks and I attempt to repeat what he just did. It's a bit messy, my rhythm never having been that good, but it comes across just fine. I imagine it would be hard to screw up. Just like that. See, an old dog can learn new tricks. I shoot him a glare, but I can't help but laughing along with him. He's right, though. This is something useful that I can use to my advantage. Increasing one's skill set is always a bonus. I'm also just excited to learn more. What's next, then? Xavier and I spent the next hour and a half or so studying Morse code together. I managed to learn a few letters so far, but not enough to be able to fully translate it. Okay, so can you tell me what I just tapped out to you? Of course I can. Then what is it? Next question. Xavier shakes his head, a smile on his muzzle. You're hopeless. An idea seems to pop into my head as he speaks. Give me a minute. I know what to do. The bat flips to a new page in the notebook and starts writing something down. I take the time to observe the scenery as he does so. The trail we're walking has taken on an uphill slant and has for a short while now. We're getting close to our next stop. I glance over at Xavier, worrying about what comes next. It'll certainly hurt, but it's probably the best way to handle this. He needs to see it for himself. I slip my bag in front of me once more and slide out the pocket watch to check the time. We're running a little behind schedule, but not enough to have much of an impact. Without this memento, I'd never be able to keep track of the days as they pass. Even when he's not here, Marshall still finds a way to take care of me. As I'm zipping the pocket back up, Xavier finishes his writing. And done. This should help you. He carefully tears the page from the book and hands it to me. I look down at the paper and see his impressively neat handwriting. Is this a cheat sheet? I prefer the term study guide, but yes. The page has every letter written with its associated dashes and dots next to them. Also included are the number 0 through 9 and some punctuation marks. It'll be easier reading over these since it's all gathered in one place. You can take the time to analyze and memorize everything whenever you have some time. Thanks, kid. I'll make sure to put this to good use. I fold the paper up a few times and slide it into the breast pocket of my shirt for easy access. Say, how are you feeling right now? Xavier glances over at me, a brightness in his eyes. I'd say I'm alright. Why do you ask? I've got a personal question for you, something I've been wondering about. I've been asking you a lot of stuff. It's only fair I gave you something in return. Ask away. I'm not sure the best way to phrase it, but I noticed you only have one wing. The realization dawns on Xavier's face. You want to know what happened to my wing, then? If you don't mind. He looks a bit sad suddenly as he faces downward. It was stolen from me when I was young, sold on the black market for whatever sick purpose they can come up with. My face immediately flushes with shame at having him bring up that trauma. I don't know what to say. The bat meets my eyes as I struggle to find my voice. Fuck, Xavier. I'm so... My words are suddenly cut off with a sudden boisterous laughter as Xavier begins cackling to himself. Holy shit, there's no way you actually believe that. He continues to laugh as my shame quickly turns to embarrassment. Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? I don't know, but for a man who preaches caution, you really let your guard down on that one. It takes a solid minute before Xavier is able to speak properly again, having laughed to himself so hard that he needed to catch his breath. I can't believe I fell for that lie. I was so quick to believe him, I didn't even stop to question things as I usually would. Just goes to show you how much I've grown to trust him in such a little time. You done now? Yeah, I'm fine. Told you I was a good liar. Yes, point you. Now answer my damn question, please. There's no sob story or anything. It's a simple reason. I was born without it. The doctor said it was some kind of extremely rare genetic defect. I've been this way all my life, so I've never been able to fly or anything, as much as I've always dreamed of it. Must have been tough, though. It had its moments, but overall, I don't let it affect me much. It's a part of me. I can't change, so I accepted it and moved on. No point in wasting energy on hating myself when I can spend it on being happy instead. Truer words have never been spoken. The incline we're walking suddenly gets a lot steeper, and I can see the area that I'm heading for not much farther ahead. Xavier seems to finally take notice of our upward journey as well. Wait, how long have we been hiking uphill? For a little while now. We'll set up camp after we hit the top. This only manages to confuse him more. I don't understand. Shouldn't we be heading downwards instead? I told you we have a few pit stops before we get there. This is the last one of the day. I stop before we reach the top, unable to see what awaits up there for us, and turn to Xavier. This will be painful to see, but I'm right here with you, okay? His confusion begins to veer further towards concern. Dorian? What's going on? We'll be coming upon a cliff just ahead. With it, you'll be able to get a proper view of the city. Okay. I'm not sure what the problem is. I sigh at him. There's a difference between being told something and actually seeing it for yourself, Xavier. You know things were destroyed, and I'm sure you even saw some of it. What you're about to see, though, is the world as it truly is now, and I promise you, no matter how prepared you might feel, that it won't be easy to see. Xavier nodded at me. I know you're right, but I'm ready for it all the same. He began tapping his fingers against his leg, likely as a nervous tick to help him stay calm. Let's go then. I take a deep breath and continue forward, Xavier following at my right side. As we step forward, another clearing comes into view, the ground having plateaued out. Across from us is another trail going downwards, and to the right is an opening in the dense foliage. The edge of the cliff. Xavier immediately is drawn towards it, his curiosity overtaking him. I let him go and turn my attention elsewhere. I walk into the area and place my bag down, removing the tent and beginning to set it up while the warm-toned sky edges ever so closely towards the night. Having done this several times in the past, I'm able to handle the task with relative ease, and the shelter is set up in no time. I glance around looking for Xavier. He's still seated on the cliff, face turned away from me, staring off into the distance. Walking towards him, I catch sight of the view for myself. I stare into the distance, taking in the scenery before me. My gaze first falls upon the edges of our city, towards the overgrown suburbs. They're damaged like the rest of the place, but less so closer to the surrounding forests you get. Flora has taken a hold of it, growing unnaturally quick in the past year. The trees sprang up amongst the battered houses, casting shadows onto the forsaken ground beneath them. The further in I look, the worse the damage begins to grow. The fallen buildings cause quite the destruction to its surroundings, having knocked into each other and smattering the city with debris. The skeletal remains of skyscrapers populating the horizon create the outline of a city long gone from what once could be considered its prime. Rays of sunlight cascade and glisten amongst the shattered glass decorating the broken world we now find ourselves in, dotting the territory as if it were a night sky. Perhaps there's still a chance at a future, at a way of uniting once more and repairing everything. Then I see it again, the thing that often drains the hope from my body. It's hard to make out from here, but I know it's there. The scar. As if someone had raked an unsharpened blade against the crust of the earth, a giant gnash carves the landscape in two. Directly down the middle of our city, From lakeshore to an unknown distance farther than the eye can see, it's a chasm too wide to properly cross. The water from the lake flows over and into it, though it never seems to drain. The wound itself goes impossibly deep, as I've been told, to the point where you can't even see the bottom. The edges are densely populated by faded, making it an unnecessary risk to even attempt to approach it purposefully. It's a scar, a mark to remind us that this is now a broken world, forever changed by whatever happened that day. At the same time, as I grieve what once was, I cannot help but admire the beauty that comes with the destruction as well. There's something in us all that seems to crave a look at misfortune, to see it for ourselves and admire it. I'm drawn into the view every single time, the highlights of the sunset combining with the heightened greenery overtaking the urban landscape. I close my eyes and take a deep breath, wiping a tear from my face as I look away from the sight. Instead, I move my gaze downwards towards Xavier, seeing the tears flowing down his cheeks silently as he stares. I look back up as well, and we stand in silence while the sun slowly sinks further downwards, being out of sight. It's really gone, huh? I nod, letting my silence speak for itself. He takes a shuddering breath in return. Do you think we'll ever be able to get things back to the way they used to be? I take a few moments before I respond. I'd be lying if I said I knew. I don't think it'll ever be the same as it once was. A small sob comes from my friends besides me. But that doesn't mean that they won't get better. It'll take time, but the world is always changing, and we can push it towards a change for the better. Right now, we have each other. That may not be much, but I think it's one hell of a start. I've seen enough of this life to tell you that there's always a brighter day after the storm. I smile softly to myself. Who better to hear that advice from than an old man? A light chuckle now comes from Xavier, the joke seeming to have landed. Now that you know what you're up against, allow me to properly introduce you to this world. I take a step closer to the edge so that Xavier can see me, and turn to face him. As he meets my eyes, my arms sweeping outward, like an announcer taking the stage, as I gesture to the city behind me. Well, kid, welcome to the apocalypse. A sad smile stretches across his muzzle as the stare drifts back from me back to the unfortunate yet mesmerizing scenery. I move to sit next to him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders to pull him in for a side hug. Thanks, Dorian. For what? Being here. Anytime. Xavier. He rests his head against me, and in turn I rest mine atop his, watching the slow retreat of the sun lead the evening into night. Our journey may just be starting, but with Xavier around, I can't help but feel this newfound spark of hope. Like there's a voice in my head repeating the same 4 words. It'll all be okay. Dear Marshall, I was so confident everything would go well yesterday. I thought I had it all planned down to a T. I should have guessed it would go wrong from the start. Our 1-year anniversary was supposed to be an incredible day. We'd started off with a visit to the theater, where they were showing that movie of the FBI working with a serial killer. You know the one. With our shared love of detective work and thrillers, I thought it'd be nice to see a classic we love on the big screen. Little did I know, a small fire that morning had shut the place down for the day. Next was the dinner at the restaurant of our first date, the place where our love truly came to blossom. On our way out, we'd picked up a bouquet of roses, a bit stereotypical but still romantic in my eyes. Of course, the restaurant had overbooked, and our seating was delayed, putting the rest of the evening on hold. Then, as we were finally seated and served our food, someone at a nearby table had knocked into the waiter, resulting in your white shirt staining that purplish-red hue. I appreciated both of their furious apologies, but we know that it wasn't on purpose. It's not like they had tried to sabotage the date. Fate was trying to do that on its own. When finally we left, that evening was beginning to draw to a close and nothing had gone as I'd hoped. The flower cart had sold out for the day to some fancy buyer who purchased every last thing, even the order I was waiting. The ice cream shop was closed despite the fact that we sprinted in a futile attempt to get there. So, I led us to the one place where nothing would get in our way. As I sat down on the park bench facing the waterfront, I stared out upon the lake and thought back on how we'd met here. Our 1 year anniversary was supposed to be an incredible day. And it was. Nothing went as planned, and some might see it as a disaster with how it went. Instead, I see it as a memorable event in our time together. When we saw what happened at the theater, we joked about how we needed to investigate for ourselves. I'm still in awe over how you nearly managed to get those cops to let us in. You really do have a way with people. Out of breath after fleeing the scene, we barely had time to catch it again as we doubled over in laughter. I knew neither of us would mind waiting at the restaurant because, after all, the date was supposed to be spent with each other. It only further proved that I could spend an insurmountable amount of time talking to you and never get bored. You always know how to hold a conversation. When the wine got spilled, the shock on the others' faces as we laughed over the coincidence was hysterical. Who would have expected 2 years in a row that you'd get wine spilled on you here? I have always said that you look good in red. Despite the flower cart being empty, I spotted some purple wildflowers growing out of the sidewalk. Even though you rolled your eyes, I knew you enjoyed the excessive display as I presented them to you as a token of my love. You couldn't resist the opportunity to respond back bigger and bolder, really giving my performance a run for its money. Too bad we couldn't get that ice cream, though. The pint at your place was great, but nothing beats some good soft serve. When the evening finally ended with us at the bench, your arm wrapped around me as we stared at the sun, which had almost entirely set by now. I smiled. It didn't matter that my plans had been led astray. What mattered is that you were there with me, Marshall. You kept a smile on my face the whole time, never letting me be saddened for a second over the whole thing. Sometimes plans can go wrong, but that's perfectly okay. Just take it in stride and move on. Face the future with whatever it may hold. I know without a doubt now that my future is with you, Marshall. I love you. Dorian. And that's where I'm gonna leave it for today. Before I forget, I will say that the little journal entries kind of remind me of the furry comic circles, and I know some of you do know about it. It's very famous. If you don't, then I suggest you go look into it. It's guaranteed to make you cry, but cry in a good way. But anyways, in the comic, sometimes the stories begin or end with Polly, who is, I guess you could say, the main person detailing the events of the story to his husband. And it usually begins like this, like recalling the events of the day or what's happening, sometimes being a little melodramatic, but even he says like he's guilty of doing that, and it's kind of cute. And a fair warning though, the story is sad, of course, because of what happens, what is going to inevitably happen to Polly. But like, trust me, if you want to read a very good furry comic from the past, I suggest you read it. Like, it's very good. And I did have the idea once of basically, reading the comic for the channel. But I don't know if it would be a good idea because, the comic is still being sold, and I don't know if the authors and the artists would appreciate me, putting their comic that, I don't know if they still make money off of it or what, but like putting it up on YouTube. I mean, I could ask and be like, can I like put like the first one? Because trust me, it's very good. It's one of those that like you get attached to because it's sentimental, it's funny, it has like those like queer things, like coming out stories and stuff like that, and then other stuff. But yeah. Anyways, but yeah. Now about this story, one last night. It is interesting to see that Dorian is getting attached to Xavier, and I'm assuming Xavier is also getting attached to Dorian. Also, Xavier being kind of analytical about things, or at the very least, not being skeptical about what he's being told by Dorian, taking it in stride and being like, yes, that makes sense, and like he's taking this all very, very well. Like the whole apocalypse thing. Right up until the point where he, saw the city as it was, or as it is, I guess, and fully realizing like, oh fuck, they're really, civilization really did come to a standstill. This whole city basically is dead, and it's overrun by these fated monsters, and there's, I guess, a scar or a fault line maybe that's basically running down from where the city is to some unknown place, and apparently it has no bottom. Maybe it's a portal to hell. But yeah, what do you guys think? Is this some sort of like biblical apocalypse, or is this some sort of, I don't know, like maybe it's just a big earthquake and it was just a fissure that was underneath the city? But that wouldn't explain the fated. I'm still trying to remember what I'm thinking about when I said people losing hope and then they basically turn into monsters, but it might be people losing hope and then dying. Or like fading away into like dust. I don't know if it was a game or a movie that I'm thinking about. But yeah, if you know what I'm talking about, then write it down in the comments. What else? I'm interested to see if in the next portion of the, of what's available, if we'll get to Haven, or if it's, if we still have some time before then. It's also interesting to see that Dorian was one of the people that founded the place, because he kind of did give off a little bit of like antisocial vibes at first, but I guess it's more of a survival instinct rather than, he didn't like people. Because he clearly was in love with Marshall, and he clearly dated before, so it's not as if he hated people. It's just, he, I guess, just was wary of people, especially when somebody rescues you out of nowhere and then bandages you out of nowhere, and then like, oh yeah, I was in a bunker for a whole year. It's like, how much of that story is true? But anyways, yeah. I'm also curious to see if anything happens when they reach Haven. If there's going to be anything like, oh, so you actually left because of this reason. Anyways, so write down in the comments what you think so far of the story, and if you would like to see it continue when it eventually updates again, because there's still one more video left for Friday of what's currently available of One Last Night. And, I would like to continue it because it's interesting so far. I would like to see how they explore this whole apocalypse setting. And it's clearly not a sad, well, not that it's not a sad story, but it's not a hopeless story. And I wonder if they're foreshadowing to the whole like, oh, your mentor dies eventually, that meaning that Dorian is gonna die eventually. I hope not. I mean, it's gonna suck. I hope that he eventually finds out what happens to Marshall, even if that means that Marshall, that they find out that Marshall turned into a fated or something. But yeah. Anywho, so yeah. So thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to read One Last Night yourself or be up to date on, what's going on with the story, then you can find a direct link to its Twitter page in the description, as well as a link to the Patreon, which I did see that they have, or the Coffee if you want to support the project. I'm assuming you get early access to builds of One Last Night if you support the Patreon. And you get to see where the story is heading before I do, or anyone else, that isn't their Patreon. Anyways, but yeah. So I guess that's it for now, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.